Welcome. With me is Reverend Dr. Craig Rinker. Dr. Rinker is an associate, besides being a Lutheran pastor, and by the way, except for maybe Jesuit priests, Lutheran pastors and Jesuit priests are the two most educated clergy in the world. Nobody studies more than these people, had to go through more, and he's got a Master's of Divinity and a PhD in communications. He's authorized to teach at the college level history, philosophy, communications, theology, and what else?
History.
History, we said that.
Oh, okay.
And he's associate professor of theology at Concordia University. Concordia University is an extremely exclusive school in Wisconsin. President Bush spoke there at the commencement exercises in 2005, and now Professor Emeritus, as he just retired. And he was also a lay minister for 30-some years, and can read and study in 7 different languages. He's a mentor to me. He's my best friend. He's so knowledgeable and will bring to you hopefully some insight about ethics, which he can also teach, and morality. And so I want to give you our true Renaissance educator and man, my friend, Reverend Dr. Craig Rinker.
Thank you. Oh, very good. Yeah. I think he expanded the number of languages I can work in. The most difficult is English. I've never gotten it down. What Daryl asked me to do is, and what I want to do, is spend most of that period just answering questions. I haven't read the textbook that you're working in, and so it seems to me that what I'd like to do is just spend, and everything I say, of course, is going to be a generalization. And when it's a generalization, it is not true in the specific instance. So what I'm saying here is just broad brushstrokes that will give us some parameters. You know, we might title this The Ethics of Terrorism. You say, well, does that fit? You know, but in fact, everyone does, each of us does what we think is the right thing to do each day. We really do. When I get up in the morning, I don't say, how many evil, wrong things can I do today? Even you know, people that are bank robbers or terrorists or whatever, those who are so terribly antisocial, think that what they are doing is the right thing to do, at least for them. So we have to say, well, what makes people think like this? You know, and how can they because we all justify our behaviors. So how do these terrorist-type people who believe that their goal in life is to kill as many people as they can, and innocents are fine, you know, there's no real rule as to who you don't kill, you know, how do they sleep at night and how do they think? So I'm just going to make just a couple of 3 things. The West follows the ethic of or morality of Aristotle, confused with or mixed with the Judeo-Christian tradition, and I'm going to put Christian ethic, and then I want to compare that with the ethic of Islam. Thank you. Aristotle's ethic is based on natural reason. All 3 of these groups, and I'll put Judeo-Christian, that's the way we like to put it. All 3 of these major groups think that we can think out what is right and wrong. All groups, all of these religious groups, well, Aristotle's not a religious, I'll put philosopher. And that somehow, it's written into us. In other words, somehow in our genetic code, somehow we are wired for a sense of right and wrong. We all have a sense of fairness. We all have a sense of what the Christian tradition calls the moral law within. Whenever we, even as little children, if we said something wasn't fair, we were appealing to some outside authority, actually, you know, that's above us or beyond us. All right, so all three have that. Now, Aristotle said, you know, again, that if you do good things, and of course he defined goodness as virtue. Now, but in his mind, virtue was skill at something. In other words, if you're an excellent artist, for example, you would be called a virtuous person because you're good at what you do. His ethic was based on what we do. And if we do good things, which would be, honor, in the Greek society, the strongest things were to honor your parents, never speak ill of your parents, do what your parents want you to do. Also, to be brave, never to be a coward. You know, the Spartan saying was, come home from the battle, you know, with your shield or on it. If you're on your shield, you're dead. Never run from battle. If you wanted to call somebody a coward in the Greek world, you would say he threw away his sword, and that was terrible. You know. So anyway, it had to do with doing good things according to the society in which they lived, which was a Greek city-state. And he said, if you do good things, then you are a good person. So doing good makes you good. Now, that's natural. I mean, I think we all say, well, that's true. But no. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the ability to do good was not within us. In other words, I could. In fact, the Romans argued about whether it was better to be good or to appear to be good, and the Romans came up with the answer: it is always better to appear to be good, because I could be a bad person and appear to be good, and everybody would like me, and that would do great. But I could be a good person, and everybody didn't recognize it, and they would all poo-poo me, you know, and make life hard for me. So in other words, this is appearance. Basically, you come down to a statement of appearance. If it appears good, then it's okay. Okay, but that's not, you know. And if we remember the words of our Lord, He said, "How can a bad tree bear good fruit?" So in other words, the Judeo-Christian tradition is that I got to change from the inside. In order to be a good person, I need not just do good things, I have to be good in order to do good. So this is a much more inward, or what I'll call spiritual, approach to morality. And now Islam is a little different here, because Islam is back more in line with Aristotle in terms of appearance, doing good. And in fact, the Islamic religion believes that people are born innocent. Now, a lot of Christians do too, but in mainline Christianity, we are born in sin. We are born defective, you know, and so we have to be changed from the inside in order to do good. In Islam, you don't have to change. In fact, if you do evil things, it's because you're miseducated. So education is very big in Islam. Specific education, an education in morality, an education in the service of Allah. It's specific. Now, in Judeo-Christian tradition, the education turns out to be similar, but it's an education that is for the individual. In other words, the individual conscience, that the masses need to be educated, not just the clergy, and so that, in fact, the rise of secular studies comes out of Judeo-Christian tradition. It would not come out of mainline Islam. There wouldn't be secular studies. There would be religious studies, but basically that's it. Now, I need to not talk too long, so I'll just say, just the general rules of. There's another thing, of course, in both these traditions that, and the tradition is of a higher power. Okay, in other words, I'm a professing Christian, and I'm also a professional Christian, and so my higher power is the Trinitarian God, and is Christ my Lord. So that in the individual effort, whereas all three groups can say, look at yourself, if you do what you like to do, and if you were the other person, if that didn't feel good to them, then you shouldn't do it. That's kind of like do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but only Christ said that in a positive sense. In other words, he said, you be the person that God wants you to be, whether or not anybody else is doing what they're supposed to be doing. That is not in Islam, and that is not in Aristotle. That is more, it is if they're good to you, you be good to them. If they're bad to you, you be bad to them. This is a work-righteous religion. This is a work-righteous religion. And unfortunately, this one is too, by many of the adherents. Because the actual moral guide for a Christian is not law. The New Testament is all over the place. It's not Judaic law. What is the guide for the Christian life? Anybody who's a Christian here? What is the guide for the Christian life? No, that's the Old Testament. That's a guide, and that's not even, that's a guide for Jewish life. They got those Ten Commandments are the best laws in the world, but Christ isn't in them. You wouldn't need to be a Christian to keep the Ten Commandments. In fact, there's a whole Jewish religion for that.
Is it the King James Version?
No. Okay, and I need to answer the question. The answer is a person. In other words, this story, what would Jesus do, is my ethic. In other words, if I can become more like Jesus, if I learn of Jesus, that's what calls me a Christian. And so if I look to him for my ethics, for my behaviors, how did he act in society? What did he say? And so I don't look at the Old Testament flat as if I were a Jewish person. I look at it through the eyes of Christ. Christ said, you study the Scriptures, and he meant the Old Testament, because you think in them you have eternal life, but they are they that testify of me. Okay, so in other words, and that's where, like I said, a lot of Christians get confused, and so we see lots of arguments going on in the society about, the printing of the Ten Commandments in the schoolroom and stuff like that, which, the Christianity as it's supposed to be is spiritual. And so, when Jesus said, when it's not worshiping in Jerusalem, it's not worshiping in Samaria, it's not worshiping in Washington, D.C., he didn't say that, but it's what? It's in your heart. So the kingdom of God is inside you. So this, of course, I'm a Christian. This, to me, is the real right way. Next thing is that the basis of the law of conscience is natural law for this group. For this group, it is, I guess, the authority of God. I'm trying to be kind and be fair. But for this is what? God is love. So the principle of ethics in the Christian life is love, because God is love. Allah is not love. Allah is merciful. There is no such thing as atonement. Forgiveness is very weak. Mercy is a strong word in Islam, that Allah is merciful. But the idea of substitutionary sacrifice for my defects and sins is not in Islam. Okay, so these can, and as you hear it, these kind of clash. They clash. If I'm a person who doesn't believe that I was born perfect, or that I was born innocent, I was born defective, I was born in a condition, and my fellow human being thinks he was born innocent, and that the only thing he does wrong is because he isn't enlightened, we think differently. We act differently. Okay? All right. So, with that most general overview, I will stop and let you just specifically ask me questions out of your text, out of what you're doing, and I will attempt to point to the morals behind it and also what is the right thing to do. Okay? So I'm stopped. Yes?
Repeat the question after he does it so that we'll get it.
Yeah, okay. Yes?
Okay. The question I have is in Islam, you have these suicide bombers.
Yes.
What under Islam gives them the right to commit suicide, to kill another?
Okay, very good. The question is, we have suicide bombers in Islam. What motivates them? What gives them the right to do that? It is because, or at least my understanding of this, is that they are attempting to, the God that they serve is more like, I'll say, the God that was believed by as a revenge God. This God gives retribution and consequences, and the religion has a vaguer picture of heaven than it has a more earthly picture of heaven than in the Christian tradition. So that if this is all there is, then and if I can get to heaven by destroying others, the infidel, the unbeliever, then I can do it. I should do it because I like the way they say. I'll repeat somebody on the news. Those 20 knuckleheads, that threw themselves into the World's Towers and the Pentagon and into the. They were deceived into believing that somehow they were going to receive an earthly paradise for doing this great thing. That Allah would see, they don't have atonement. That Allah would reward them. And the reward is based on, so there's rewards and punishments. And that's my answer. I don't want to talk too long.
Is that under the Islam? Is it in they practice the Koran, right? All of it?
Yes, but the Koran is more of a series of sayings. It is not, when you hear the word Koran, don't think Bible. It's the Bible to them, but the Bible is a narrative. The Bible is the story of God's actions in history. Muhammad's Koran are the sayings of Muhammad, which are not in any particular order, and they are somewhat confusing. But they try to be interpreted by what did it mean to Muhammad's world. And so Islam has a trouble with because his world was quite clannish and tribal, and he used his religion to unify the Arab peoples, and he did it by force.
So is that in the Quran? Does it say anything about would it pertain to the bombings and stuff like that?
Oh no. No, it's not that specific. It just. I have some notes here on it, but I don't think I'll even try to take the time to quote them. Let's say it this way. The more fundamentalist, about 10% of Islam is fundamentalist. If there are a billion...
Explain fundamental.
Okay, fundamentalists are those individuals who try to get closest to the original. Okay? In other words, a fundamentalist Christian is one who tries to get as close to the apostolic teachings as possible. A New Testament Christian, a Bible. When you see Bible churches, or non-denominational churches, or evangelical churches, those are churches where the individual's members are attempting to be as close to the New Testament as possible. Also, when you see Amish, Mennonites, and those kinds of groups, which we would say, well, they're really kind of cultic. They're stuck in time. but that they're attempting to be Christian. I mean, they're attempting. All right, so in Islam, and I doubt that there are 10% of Christians that are trying to do that. But 10% of Islam is, and Islam is when they go to fundamental, in other words, in my thinking, when I become a fundamentalist Christian, I would become more of a pacifist. I would become a peacemaker. You know, blessed are the peacemakers. I would be a person who did not take up the sword. The closer I get to the teachings of Jesus, okay, himself. But in Islam, it's not the same. The closer they get to Muhammad and his teachings and the fundamentalists of the Koran, the more they're thrown back into this. And of course, I'm not an Islamic believer. They're thrown back into the 7th century. You know, he had his revelations in 622, and so there's, and in that world, there is retribution. There's fighting. There's it was a more brutal world, and so there's a lot of get them back kind of stuff. You know, take them out kind of stuff. So the more fundamentalistic you are in Islam, the Muslim peoples, Islam is the religion, Muslims are the followers, okay? The Muslim peoples have a real issue with modern times. They have much more. Now, we went through the issue of modern times in the Christian church in the 16th century. You know, Dr. Daryl said I was a Renaissance man. Well, Renaissance was spurred by the church, by believing Christians who made a difference between the Dark Ages type of Christianity and the Christianity that was actually, you see, going back to the roots, they went back to the New Testament and they said, wait a minute, the Catholic Church of this day in the late 1400s is certainly not the Catholic Church of that. I'm a Protestant Christian, by the way. And so the Catholic Church had to even reform itself. You know, it took them 20 years, Council of Trent. But they had, so in other words, Islam is in crisis in some ways. Islam is in crisis. And of course, unfortunately, we got our nose in it. And so, okay, I need to shut up and allow more questions. Yes?
One of the main things we're talking about right now is defining terrorism.
Yes.
What makes a terrorist act a terrorist act? How would you define terrorism?
I would define it as...
Repeat the question.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I've been asked how I would define terrorism. To me, you know, I'm a Western culture Christian. Terrorism is when I have set a goal to do the most damage to the most people in order to, quote unquote, make a point. In other words, there is a reason, a rationale behind it. The difference between terrorists and a psychopath is that the psychopath isn't making a statement, except for his own self. But a terrorist believes that he's making a statement for his people or his religion. That's the difference. I mean, because with terrorism, you're including innocent people who have nothing to do with you or your religion or your money or anything. You know, you just blow them up because they're there. Yes?
So could they eventually stop the Islam, well, is this sect of Islam
Yes.
from doing terrorist acts?
We hope so.
Say that again.
Yeah, okay, the question is could the Islamic people stop the fundamentalist movement?
The fundamentalists that are in power.
Yeah, it's the problem is that, you know, I was talking to a Muslim this morning, a citizen of Jordan, who says, you know, the Christians and the Muslims get along in Jordan. We don't have any problems. He says, and the Muslims and the Israelis get along in Jordan. It's these governments. He says they're crazy. And that's how he feels. You know, for the first 100 years, when Islam took over Jerusalem in 648, or 648 AD, for over 100 years until 750 AD, Jewish and Christian residents in Jerusalem, which was governed by Islam by conquering it, had it fine. They had a good life. 100 years. And then the Turks took over. When the Turkish Muslims took over, life became hellacious for the Jews and the Christians. Because and again, so there's this confusion within that culture between politics, peoples, and religion. Just the same as there in this culture. And so the Ottoman Turks actually ruled that whole area off and on, until actually 1918. And to the end of World War I is finally, and then the Western world cut up the Middle East and made these nations. Just drew lines on the map, and they did it on purpose to make them weak. Make sure that these Arab groups or nations would be weak. Well, guess what? They found oil. and that changed everything. Okay. So, Islam is, but the Islamic religion is the second largest religion in the world. And so if you have 1 billion adherents, which they do, that means 100 million are fundamentalists. That's a lot of people. And they're all over the world. We're fighting terrorism in the Philippines, in Indonesia, Al-Qaeda is only one little group. They just got the main line, they got the main name because of bin Laden. And of course, bin Laden was eschewed by his own religion, certainly by his peoples. Saudi Arabia wouldn't have anything to do with them. Okay, Annie? Yes?
So like the fundamentalists and like Muslims, they don't agree on it. They don't have the same views.
That's correct. A more strict interpretation, if I take the Koran without interpreting it, if I just take it straight, I end up being a Taliban type guy, where women are chattel, in my opinion. See, and there's a tremendous difference because Muhammad's wife ran the show. Okay, in other words, there was certainly equality between men and women in the original religion, expression of Muhammad, but it went away with the stricter interpretation. And we have to remember, it's the same in the Christian church. All the people in Europe were brutes. So they were. When the Christian ministers would try to teach them things like the Vikings, try to convert the Vikings, the only story the Vikings wanted to hear about Jesus was when Peter cut off the guy's ear. They liked that story. What is this about peace? When you're a warrior people. And so that's why I'm saying Islam's in crisis. Unfortunately, if we don't, we're a secular nation. People say we're a Christian nation. Well, we're post-Christian. And the more secular that we get, this is my opinion, the more secular that this country gets, the more its morals are going to go down the tubes. Why? Because of my faith base. I do what I do as a human being in relationship to my God. And Islamic people do too if they're firm believers. But a secular person says, no, God's not in the picture. We have to do everything without God in the equation. And if we do, so then there's that wrestling match between separation of church and state, which I wholeheartedly believe in. And I'm a Lutheran. Dr. Martin Luther was highly in favor of separation of church and state 200 years before the United States came up with it. But I'm not in favor of freedom from religion. What this country needs is a level playing field and treating everybody fairly and freedom of speech and all that. It doesn't need to be anti-religion. We're not smart because what happened, we are religious peoples. And so when we don't have a religion, we end up being Wicca witches and, real simplistic religions, natural religions. We go back to astrology, tarot cards, seances, ghosts, and all that. The ghosts come back when we don't have a firm spiritual life. More questions? Yes?
Usually in the Christian religion, there's always competing views within the
That's correct.
How come we never hear the same from Islam?
Okay, let's see. Within the Christian religion, there are constantly competing views, but we never hear about that in Islam, or Islam, however we say it. That's the question. My answer is because we are in a wrestling match in the Western tradition between Christ and Aristotle. And I actually took a course, I didn't teach it, but I took a course that says, where the question was, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? Meaning the scholarly philosophical roots that come out of philosophy in Athens and the religious roots that come out of Jerusalem. So we're always in a wrestling match between, and in our day it's science and religion and, and evolution and creation and things like that. That's the way we Westerners think. The Easterners, including Eastern Christians, don't think like that. We don't have a dualism in the East, and that includes Islam. In other words, the Eastern Christian Church, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and the old-style Byzantine Coptic Christians of Egypt and such, they don't think like that. They think Eastern-like, which is more integrated. It's more cyclical. And so they don't see a confusion between church and state. So that's the answer to the question. There's no confusion. And they can't think of a fundamentalist Islam cannot think of a country that is not run by Sharia law or the Koran. That to them is unthinkable. So that's why it has to be run by the Taliban or it has to be run by nobody. In their minds.
We were talking, sir, about issues of morality in terms of things that we do, because we look at Islam and we look at that nation and we look at the terrorist acts, and yet we describe 3 situations basically in our studies so far that question our own morality and are we terrorists too?
Yeah.
Freedom fighter or patriot versus terrorist.
Right.
But is a base issue. But I'll give you 3 quick examples.
Good.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Why is that not a terrorist act? And then a more individual example is a Marine in Fallujah gets in a firefight, goes into the building where the people they were fighting are. There are a wounded man there, and he goes ahead and shoots him, as opposed to any other alternative. And also, lastly, we saw a film, a piece of a film where Jack Nicholson talked about you can't handle the truth. And that truth is where we actually have operations in our military and in our government that do what we call are out there on the wall. Doing those things that we don't really want to know are done for our protection may certainly present moral problems. I know that's a complex morality scenario.
No.
But why are we moral when we do it?
Yeah, and they're not.
Why are they not?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. I imagine the camera picked that up. I hope you did. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Okay. You have a booming voice. So,
Sorry.
all right. Yeah, get to the specifics. First of all, I would be like Senator McCain. I do not believe that the United States of America should engage itself in terrorist acts or torture. And my feeling, I'll try to make it real specific, because to me that is, it's immoral. I mean, it takes away, it makes me like the other person. See, that one of the reasons why we stand at a certain level, what we call morality, is no matter what the other person is doing, we do the right thing. And if we don't think terrorism is the right thing, why should we engage in it? Even in a minuscule thing like torturing one individual. I would assume that what that soldier did was wrong. If there was any option that the person that he shot could have been rescued or anything like that. Now, in the midst of a firefight, you don't have time to think. So his position there is to meet an objective. In other words, And this human being that was in front of it, if that person, whether that person was innocent or not, if that person was, what do you call that? Impeding. Is that right?
Impeded.
Thank you. See, I told you I can't speak English. Then that person had to be out of the way.
Under what authority?
Under the authority of war. In other words, this is...
Speaking vocation?
Yes, under the authority of war. And I'll back that up with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Einstein had put a note on FDR's desk just a little before FDR died that he said, oh, please don't use the atomic bomb. Don't use it. And he was a Jew, Einstein was, and he had been persecuted. He had to get to the United States under Nazism. And he was, he wasn't directly involved in the atom bomb, but he certainly understood it. He understood how it worked. Well, FDR never saw that. Truman looked at it and said no. And Truman's reasoning was, as the head commander-in-chief of the United States, was that the actual dropping of those bombs would save lives. The one thing that makes World War II is World War II was total war with the Japanese people. No, every Japanese was, in fact, a soldier when it came to the United States. They were going to fight us all the way to Tokyo, even though that war was lost. They did not think Westernly. In the Western world, if you're losing the war, you give up, okay? But not with them. They believed their emperor was divine, so it was religion, and so every Japanese human being was under war. And so it would be Western thinking for us to say, well, that was a bad thing we did, because there's no question that we saved 1 million lives. We killed 100,000 or 200,000 with 2 bombs. But when we bombed Dresden, with firebombed it, we killed more people than that. The streets were on fire. They burned the streets. And yet nobody said anything, because we were also at total war with Germany. But the only reason we were at total war with Germany is because they had an insane dictator who wanted to punish his own people because they were losing. And so if the Germans lost, they didn't deserve to have anything. So Hitler elongated the war in order to destroy the German people. So where's the morality there? But morality has to do with, again, our sense of right and wrong. So that would be close to terrorism when, in fact, we kill some in order to save more. And that's probably the argument that the terrorists use themselves, that we kill some in order to save more. But, and they say, well, we have to be terrorists because we don't have nuclear warheads. We don't have a navy. But yet we have this right to rule our own lives. Or actually, what they're doing is we have this right to rule everybody else's lives, because we fight for freedom, so that we can keep our freedoms, but those people fight in order to be in control. Bin Laden would never live the way that he wanted his society to live. The people and that tells you something. The people at the top of those societies, communists and us, they live worse than any capitalist's lives. And I think that tells you something. Is it? Am I done?
I don't want to dominate
Yeah.
the conversation. I want you to
No, yeah.
We had thousands of questions that we were talking about.
Yeah, throw them at me.
But
'Cause we got time.
Basically saying, if I read you correctly, that it really comes down to just different ways of thinking and value structures between
Yeah.
2 worlds or 3 worlds. Right? The
Yeah.
Japanese had their, and something's got to give.
Yeah, and in terms of the religion, the majority of religions are what I would call work righteous. In other words, if you do what the Lord wills, then you're going to get to go to heaven. If you don't do what the Lord wills, then He's going to be PO'd at you and send you to hell. Well, that's not what the message is. And so in some respects, Christianity, is above morality, if you can say that. And so let's take a Christian example of in Hitler's Germany. I'm sorry. We'll take a Christian example in Hitler's Germany. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who made some, because he wrote his letters from prison while he was in a concentration camp, was a Lutheran pastor. About 1/3 of the Lutheran churches in Germany were professing, or what do you call that? You know, the German people were totally wowed by Hitler. I mean, he promised them a Volkswagen in every garage and a chicken in every pot, and he gave it to them. They had a Western. We were in a terrible depression in the United States of America, but and their money system was ruined, and he fixed it and did all kinds of stuff. He was a savior, and he certainly had enough sense to hide from the German people what he was doing, his brutality and stuff like that. And it also progressed. But the church kind of saw through that and said, this guy, you know, because he was having everybody make pledge allegiance to him instead of to Germany. And but anyway, Bonhoeffer spoke out against him. The Lutheran pastors spoke out against this guy. And they said, don't listen to this idiot, you know. And so, of course, they got to go to prison. They got to be thrown in concentration camps. Now, when Bonhoeffer was thrown into a concentration camp, he also participated in the planning of the murder of the assassination of Adolf Hitler. Now, here's a Lutheran pastor involved in the assassination plot to kill Hitler. And you say, well, boy, is that what a confusion. Yes?
Does that make him a terrorist in some way?
Well, see, that's what I'm trying to say. Think on that. You know, see now, but of course, he's not a terrorist in the sense of, well, maybe, you know, there's things to think about. But of course, he's in a country at war. He would not be a terrorist, but a traitor. He would be more of a traitor. And of course, some of the generals, because they saw what a terrible person, what an animal that Hitler was. And a megalomaniac, paranoid, a mess. So Bonhoeffer wrote about it, and he said, you know, after the plot didn't work and everything. Oh, by the way, they hung him. They killed him. One of the things about protesting that makes us not a terrorist is that we're willing to take the consequences of our behaviors. In other words, if I'm publicly breaking a law for a demonstration or something, then if I'm actually an ethical, moral person, I have to be responsible and be willing to go to jail and pay the price. You know, otherwise I am a type terrorist. If I'm unwilling to take the consequences of my own behavior, then I'm immoral. You know, that's part of responsibility.
So basically you're saying like...
He said that when you're dealing with the devil, you use the devil's means. And that's another line of thinking. You know, in other words, we're dealing with the devil with these people so that we can use the devil's means. I was so disappointed last night, but you know, for example, when President Obama, who stood out against these super PACs, now bought into the super PACs. And, you know, and again, so at the moral level, you're saying, I'm against super PACs. I mean, it's going to ruin our country. So I wish that he could have stood up, but he was afraid he'd lose. He was afraid he wouldn't get enough money. So he, you know, his advisors told him, well, you better buy into the super PACs. And he did. So then I'm going, a cave-in, you know. Yes?
Can war be moral?
Yes.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. Oh, can war be moral? Yes. Okay. In the Christian church, they talk about just wars and unjust wars, etc. But all power and authority, the use of force, let's put it that way, use of force comes through the what in my lining up of the commandments would be the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother. Parental authority is the original authority, and in the Old Testament, the parents actually had the authority to put their children to death. I doubt it was rarely ever used, but they didn't. But no one has the power to kill. That's independent. So in other words, the Old Testament is very strong, and I'm in agreement with capital punishment because that is the right that God gave humans to manage human society. There is true evil in this world, and sometimes you just have to take it out. But you have to do it in a way in which is honorable. In other words, the whole business of trials and innocence, and even in the Old Testament, they had cities where they could run to, so that they wouldn't have these blood feuds and things like that. So yes, did I answer the question? Okay. Yeah. It comes. So the use of force is appropriate, and to defend one's. It's my duty as a father to defend my children. They're totally dependent on me at one time. And so I'm in a complex society. I can't do that, So I turn that over to the police. I turn it over to the military. I turn over the protection of my children.
So protecting your children is what the Constitution was saying in protecting posterity. Is that not the way you would
Sure.
What? Could you, in our last minute or so, maybe you could just comment on the morality or lack of morality of the Constitution of the United States, whether it's a living document, and some of those, just real quick, I know it's a hard question.
The Constitution of the United States is one of the most brilliant pieces of work that humans have ever put together. It is a, we live under, but notice that it was the amendments that talked about rights, not the Constitution. The Constitution is a political document creating a democratic republic. We are a republic, so we're not total democracy. We elect senators, congressmen, et cetera, to represent us. So we are a democratic republic, and I think a lot of people get that confused. But the Constitution itself is a brilliant piece of work, and it's based on the deistic view, which is, in other words, it's not necessarily Christian because they attempted to keep separation of church and state, but it certainly is in the model of divine rights of people, that we have unalienable rights, that the people rule rather than the kings. So no, it's a brilliant piece of work, but it's not really a moral or immoral document. In other words, I can be a Christian in a communist country, a monarchy, a parliamentary, procedure deal, republic, democracy, or no government. I can be a Christian in all that.
Well, use of the word Constitution by a political person has come to be a code word for Republican or a code word for. We have so many of these code words that we try to cloak our true intentions behind.
Well, yes. What I could do is, as we finish here, is to invite you. I'll talk to Daryl, and I'll invite you to come to my class because I teach speech, and when I'm talking about propaganda and brainwashing, because both of those, that's what we watch on TV every day. Propaganda.
Regime, right?
Yes, it is. I mean, it would be fitting to know it, to have understanding how brainwashing works, how propaganda is called selective truth. What you do is you say true statements, but they're only really half true. They're selected. But thank you for listening to me for 50 minutes or so.
Thank you, Dr. Rinker. Reverend
Okay.
Dr. Rinker.
All right, Guy. That's good.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Perfect.